Disintegrate this rock and open Heaven's Gate. Turn to account the eyes of fate.
The recent exploration of the Masters of the Universe has led to significant changes in the franchise's lore, which Mattel launched to great success back in the 1980s. While some of these changes actually developed from the arcs of the characters, others were based on the unused potential of older arcs. One such development was the emergence of Preternia, the land that plays a crucial role in the world of He-Man. Let's take a look at the history of Preternia, its champions, and how its lore has developed over time. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Preternia?
Origin of Preternia. If you delve into the history of Preternia, it may sound like some mythological lore, and that's largely due to the people who have managed to convey that impression. The unique blend of what one might call the afterlife, ancestral memory, and battlefield of power elevates Preternia to a whole new level of legend when compared to such lands in discussion. When the Orb of Power was destroyed and the Sword of Power was split into two halves, the land of Eternia was left without any magic. Only some fragments continued to linger, but the two fragments returned to their land of origin, the very lands where they had been forged. Preternia and Subternia. For a much clearer perspective, Preternia was the light half of these lands, while Subternia was the dark half. But then came the fallen heroes, as both Mossman and Adam, who had died in the final battle, were made residents of Preternia. While Mossman became one with the forests, a spirit that occasionally manifested and dropped some wise words, Adam also managed to stick with the light half of the sword and became known as the Champion. Even though he was the hero during the final battle, he decided to remain as the lesser version of himself, Prince Adam, a move that would later take about their identity in the afterlife. The fellow Preternians decided to give him the name Flea Man because of this heroic act, even though it does sound like a gut punch. However, that's not where the story of Preternia ends, because it continued to evolve in recognition with the events that unfolded. When Teela went on her quest to reforge the Sword of Power, the mortals would end up getting brought into this eternal plane, and her comrades, Andra, Evelyn, Beastman, Orko, and Roboto, the ones who braved both Subternia and the Scareglow, finally managed to reach the gate to Preternia. Orko was the one who died in the process, and this death wasn't left alone, as both Adam and Mossman memorialized this death in Preternia. While Adam carved Trollan symbols on the stones, Mossman ended up summoning Trollan flora. The rest of the companions ultimately used tokens to consecrate the site. Thus, the land of Preternia would also become a space of mourning and continuity between the living and the fallen. Adam offered his half of the sword so that the quest could be completed, and asked these travelers to reforge it with the help of Hero. Then he went to King Grayskull so that these travelers could head back to the land of the living through a portal that had been hidden in the Grayskull Tower. But it was around this time that Grayskull was busy with the Big Hunt, where they preyed upon a creature across the realms, and this time around, it was a purple panther that the heroes of Preternia were also chasing. In the end, Grayskull, riding his Bionatops, won the chase and caught the panther, letting the creature go at the end. Teela's comrades met up with Hero at the central tower to reforge the swords, and it was here that Andra came up with the idea to turn the tower into a large fortress, because the walls of the tower were constructed with the indestructible ore known as Eternium. To go ahead with the reforging process, Roboto was attached with cables to 4 spires inside the hall, while Evelyn powered his core with whatever magic was left in her wand, thus allowing him to use it for the forge. All the heroes gathered around to celebrate their plan, and it was here that Grayskull agreed to take Teela and her comrades to Eternia through the portal. Throughout the entire interaction, Adam had kept his identity as He-Man a secret, which really upset Teela. She decided to keep things from him too, and didn't let him know about the danger that Eternia and the entire universe faced. Meanwhile, Roboto was working on the reforging, and due to some malfunction, the core exploded, severely damaging him. And right as his functions had started to shut down, he realized that he had developed the fear of dying, outgrowing any aspect of his program. Witnessing this loss, Adam decided that he would not let any more of his friends die and decided to go back to Eternia. As he planned it, every one of his fellow Preternians let him know that once he does that, he will never be able to come back to Preternia a second time. Even though it resulted in his loss, Roboto had managed to reforge the two halves of the sword, and Evelyn acquired this sword of power and ended up claiming the power of Grayskull for herself, changing herself to God Lyn. But she didn't just stop there. She opened the gate to Preternia and then destroyed it, killing everyone who remained in the Eternal Land. The heroes and heroines who used to live in this realm, including King Grayskull, Kuduk, Vicar, Wundar, and even Mossman, were all reduced to mere atoms. This move would alter the cosmic balance and prove the importance of Preternia on a scale that none of our heroes had ever imagined. Those who died suffered due to the absence of this land, like King Randor, whose soul was denied passage to the land and ended up lingering. Thought to be a reward to the bravest of the brave, the newfound role of Preternia was more about the destination of the souls. Original pitch for Preternia. You might have noticed that the original pitch for Preternia from the 1980s differed significantly from what we've received about this mythical land. According to that exploration, Preternia emerged as part of Mattel's broader Powers of Grayskull project in the mid-1980s, and it was in this project that the history of Eternia was incorporated as the land of Preternia. Preternia was supposed to be a prehistoric version of Eternia's distant past, where dinosaurs, giants, and wizards ruled the land. According to this lore, the sorceress took He-Man to the central tower of Eternia back into the mythic era so that he could witness Grayskull's origin and the very first war that took place with the Snake Men. Tim Kilpin's draft indicated that the protagonist of this time was someone who went by the name of Eric, the wizard's apprentice who ended up transforming Grayskull. Later developments would change his name to Gray, and then the magical champion of Preternia known as Hero. King Hiss and his Snake Men were supposed to be the main antagonists of Preternia, and that was primarily to give these characters more of a natural origin, instead of explaining their power and menace while introducing He-Man's present-day arc, and when these villains make it there. Most of the original notes for the concept behind this lore suggested that Preternia was a stage for many of the ancient wars, and it also featured the central tower of Eternia as the key tower, housing the time machine, which allowed people to travel back to Preternia through a portal. But it was only later that Mattel realized the value of Preternia increased when they put to use the unrealized mythic weight it had by reframing it as the resting place of Mossman and Adam, making it their eternal resting place. While some call it an expansion of the 1980s arc, others have had a clear understanding that it is way more than that, and it's primarily a reinterpretation of those concepts. The radical transformation. Throughout the 80s and 90s, the idea of Preternia became a lesser priority, as the larger concept of Eternia and the ancient Eternia overshadowed it. This idea would remain with some expansion for the next decade, until 2021, when Kevin Smith introduced Masters of the Universe Revelation and completely transformed Preternia and its appearance for him. Eternia was regarded as an Eternian afterlife for fallen heroes, and even figures like Hero existed here as eternal archetypes of this realm. When explaining how he changed this lore using the idea of Easter eggs and channeling the potential of the stories that had been left unexplored through Revelation, Smith said, "Easter eggs are a big part of our culture, as we all know. Like, it's one thing to enjoy a thing as presented, it's another thing to be able to enjoy the inside baseball of it all. And that's something that my whole career they always tried to beat out of me. Because, I connected the movies back in the day, and they're all in the View Askew universe. And I remember whoever I worked with, like the studio, whether it be Miramax, Universal, or the Weinstein Company, they were always like, you gotta stop putting in references to your other movies and stuff like that. And I'm like, why? And they're like, because only a few people find it funny, the people who've seen the other movies. What if you got people in the audience who never saw those other movies? And I was like, well, hopefully they'll enjoy the movie we're presenting. But hopefully the people who did enjoy the previous stuff, that shit, we didn't call it Easter eggs back then. But man, if you saw that other flick, here's another joke within the inside of this flick. So I've been doing that for years, but they'd always try to beat it out of me. They're always just like, oh, that's so alienating. Now, that's all anybody wants. They want everything connected, man. Everyone's trying to find a way to build a universe and stuff like that. So as we went into this, there were certain Easter eggs that we definitely knew that we were going to throw in, like Rob David, who's our executive at Mattel, who's like, it's a shame to call him the exec, but that is his job. But he's as creative as any writer or any of the artists who've worked on this. Rob, when I gave him my story, was just like, this is great. All I ask is that you put Preternia in it. And I was like, get out of here. And he was like, it's a legendary toy that nobody really got to have. And like, to be able to put it in there would be something special. So we turned Preternia, which in the Mattel lore was Preternia of old with dinosaurs, we turned that into our version of heaven. We turned Subternia into our version of hell. So Preternia was the first Easter egg. The second Easter egg going in was, of course, Hero. We wanted to do that because this is a character that never got to be in the cartoons. Same with Stinkor, and same with Scareglow. So going into it, we knew some elements had been made. Like, yeah, there's a Scareglow figure, but he was never in the legacy of the classic cartoon. We knew that bringing those in would be fan-servicey moments. And then repurposing Scareglow into our Lord of Hell, so to speak, like suddenly you take a character that you know doesn't have many parameters because it hadn't been defined in many other incarnations, and you know, you get a bit more freedom with the character and get to use the character that way. However, the franchise hasn't yet entirely accepted this massive transformation of the art. While some wonder if Smith's version of Preternia is more of a poetic, symbolic construct, others dive right into the idea that it's a clean retcon of the concept. The champions of Preternia. As we discussed, many champions in the lush green lands of Preternia have earned their immortality after having led a brave life. These heroes hunt by day on this land, and at night, they share their stories at the fireside. While many of them have had some mention or presence in the He-Man arc from the 80s, there have been some interesting developments in their arcs, based on the manner in which Revelations sought to establish them as important characters of Preternia. Let's explore the arc for some of these characters and how it helps in establishing their lore in the newly defined take on Preternia. Vikor. Originally intended to be a prehistoric version of He-Man himself, Vikor was repositioned into a different role, one that provided him with more definition. Around the time when King Grayskull died, there remained no suitable individual who could take on this responsibility, and Vikor was the one who became the regent for the sword until the next champion came along. Even though he had a quick and short run as the one who wielded the sword, he did manage to defeat the fighting foemen and the hordes of snake men during his time. Hero. Enter the much-talked-about legend from Preternia, a complicated character who has been ever-present in the lore of the Masters of the Universe. Even though we might identify him as a singular character, the lore has had two previous versions of it. One was the son of Adam and Teela, and the other was the face of Preternia, a flagship figure. However, the current lore has transformed him into a powerful wizard and an ancestor of He-Man. Another prequel comic establishes him as the son of King Grayskull and the heir to the Sword of Power that his father forged. King Grayskull. Grayskull has been an essential figure in the Masters of the Universe lore for quite a while now, and there were various stories in both the original animated series and the action figure arc for the character. But Revelation took the arc to a whole new level with a significant departure from anything that we might have gotten used to about the character. An ancestor of He-Man and his father, King Randor, he fought alongside Randor along the hordes of Hordak and entombed the very spirit within the Sword of Power. In the later mythology, he would be identified as the one who forged the Sword of Power, and Castle Grayskull was named in his honor. With the new take on the mythology, there were many interesting developments, one of which involved introducing characters of color into the lore. In this rendition, Hero is depicted as a black character, Kuduk. Kuduk is the sorceress who preceded Teela Na, the one who sent Teela on her quest to retrieve the swords. Kuduk served as the advisor to Queen Vina of Grayskull, and she was the Oracle of Zoar. Even though her character hardly had any proper exploration in the original run of the animated series, the newer interpretation allowed for some interesting developments that will enable 3 sorceresses in the Eternian timeline to be linked through her. Wondar. Much like his name, the character is a bit of a wonder. He first appeared as a mysterious mail-away figure in the early days of the toy line, looking almost identical to He-Man, but with darker paint and different armor. Fans later dubbed him Wonderbread He-Man after a long-running myth that the figure had been part of a Wonder Bread promotion. In reality, Mattel never partnered with Wonder Bread. The rumor just stuck because of confusion around old mail-away offers. Over time, the myth became so popular that Mattel leaned into it, canonizing the character as Wondar. In the lore, his story is set about 100 years before Adam, where he became the He-Man of his era after rescuing the sorceress. She entrusted him with safeguarding the swords and the secrets of Grayskull. What began as a fan misunderstanding eventually turned into one of the most legendary inside jokes of the Masters of the Universe mythos, making Wondar both a collector's oddity and a true part of Eternian history. Who was the Preternia disguise He-Man? Exploring the champions of Preternia, it becomes clear that the land was not just a battleground for them, but a narrative crucible that explored the past, present, and potential of Eternia, all converging at one point. However, there's a much more interesting arc from the 1980s mini-comic The Powers of Grayskull, which explored the character of Preternia disguise He-Man. He was sent back in time via the combined power of both the Central Tower and the Cosmic Key to witness the war between his ancestor, King Grayskull, and the Snake Men and the Horde Invader. Concealing his identity with a cloak and a mask, he prevents any chance of being identified by his ancestor. He thus uncovers the secret to defeating the Snake Men, returning to his own time to defeat King Hiss. Preternia disguise He-Man doesn't just stand as an essential part of He-Man's lore, but it expands on the idea of Preternia and how it becomes a realm that has both temporal and mythic flexibility. It becomes a land where lessons are learned, and heroes can meet across generations to explore their contemporary struggles and seek out answers that actually enable the narrative experiments. Marvelous verdict. With the new Masters of the Universe feature film in development, it won't be surprising if it adheres to the whole new take on the lore and further develops how we look into the arc of Preternia. Perhaps the entire thing takes place right there, reuniting the heroes with their past while also allowing them to enter the afterlife, a concept that has become very popular among fans. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.